Hello and welcome to episode 2 of our aptly named Code and Character podcast. Yes, Bevan and I have finally come up with a name, or you can thank Bevan for the great name. And in this episode, we are going to talk about why we became Drupal developers. But before we jump into our list, and Bevan and I have both created our own lists, and we'll go one by one. So Bevan, how was your week?
Oh, it was good. It was a lot happened this week. It's fantastic. I launched a podcast. There's an episode of it up on YouTube on this channel. Funny enough.
That's correct.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we also got a comment as well, which was surprising. And it was a pretty decent comment. When I mean a decent comment, it was a real comment that talked about the issues of upgrading Drupal, which I totally agree. So that was good.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know their handle. Who were they?
I actually think I think that same person commented on one of my Drupal videos as well. I feel like I've seen that person around. So anyway, it's good. Don't know how they found out because we haven't really promoted, as of this recording, we haven't really promoted these podcasts because we are trying to get a nice library of them before we start doing the whole, promotion, shorts, short form content, all that good stuff, all the stuff that you kind of sometimes cringe when you see. Anyway. All right, so let's start off with our list. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this topic is about why we became Drupal developers. I don't know if I would call myself a Drupal developer. I know that's I'd be curious to see what I've got on my LinkedIn because I'm not sure if I probably do have Drupal developer, but I think nowadays you kind of just say developer in general, but I am kind of looking forward to this list. So do you want to go through your first point and then I'll
go through,
jump in?
I'll absolutely go through that. I want to speak that interesting point. I'm absolutely a Drupal developer. That's
a Drupal developer that does click-based development, as I like to call, because you spend a lot of time clicking around.
There's a conversation about site building versus developer thing that we can have one day too. Fantastic.
Yes.
To get into it, it was, we're talking, I think Drupal I got into around 2010, 2011, late 2010, quite a while ago. And at the time I was stay-at-home father with a less than 1-year-old son at the time.
Okay.
And with the mother working full-time and me at home, I was looking for ways to try and support that and encourage that a little bit, and did some freelancing with an old friend of mine who happened to be my high school computers teacher from my HSC. And he was doing Drupal, and I sort of whoops, I got things falling down here. And I had a chat to him and was just doing a little bit of ad hoc freelancing here on and off. And he had a website. So he was doing some Drupal work himself. And offered me, and then and the first thing I did, of course, was jump into the theming layer and make some changes in there before quickly sort of getting a handle, reading the documentation there a little bit. Going back so long ago, I can't remember what it was I read or what, but very early got the idea that you don't put business logic in the theme. Probably what really, that's the moment I became a Drupal developer. I think the moment that I realized that I started to understand the concept of building out in modules, not putting logic in the theme, so to speak. And then as things went, life changes and things like divorces and that happened. So there was a time there where I went, right, I need some stability and a full-time job. And I've just discovered this thing called Drupal. So I applied for a Drupal role, got given a, an exercise to do where they said, hey, build a module, make a block that says this, have that block display in a certain place. And I did that exercise, submitted it, and got told it was one of the best submissions they had. Which and I'd very new to Drupal at that point. So that was, and I bring that up because that was a case of me going into the Drupal how to build a module documentation, following that through, running some coding standard checkers on my code, and I think that's pretty much why I got this as the best submission we got, because it actually worked and I read coding standards on it, so it was all nice and neat. But that was bringing in, that's the years of coding experience before that I think helped that. So it was, as an existing PHP developer, I was able to apply those skills, and then here we go. How long's that now? 2011. It's 2024, and I'm still learning Drupal.
Yeah, because they keep changing it. That's why.
Well, that, and it's very big and deep. There's so much. There's so many different APIs.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So that was my beginnings in that, and sort of just fell into it. But that's the thing. Once you pull the thread on Drupal and you start getting a job, and you realize there's lots of jobs, and the work just keeps coming, and you never stop. And you're always like, what's this job security on Drupal like? And then years and years later, you're like, there's demand still in this little niche, which is an interesting point. As niche as Drupal is, it's an interesting, because it's nowhere near as popular as some other CMSs, but there's always work, right? Because the developers are rare too.
Yes. So. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's my little story of how I.
Okay.
It's similar stories too.
Yeah.
By choice.
Well, let me jump into my first point that I wrote down, because Bevan hasn't seen my points. I saw his points because he chucked it into a shared doc, but he hasn't seen mine. Ooh. So my first point is I wanted to build sites using a product, not a framework, because I started just coding stock standard PHP sites. And my first proper web development job was actually using first version of Symfony, back before it was rewritten as a Symfony framework where you would configure YAMLs and all that type of stuff. And also I played around a lot with like beta version of Rails as well, Ruby on Rails, which goes way back. But I always wanted to focus, I wanted to specialize in Drupal purely because one thing I didn't like, especially with frameworks, is that you're always building the same thing over and over again in frameworks. You're creating a registration page, a sign-up form, a forgotten password form, and Symfony had plugins that you can kind of plug in, but still there was a lot of custom code involved. And I was like, you know what? I want to use Drupal. I want to be, at this point I knew Drupal, but I was like, there's better ways of doing this. Okay. It kind of sucks that you have to rebuild the site from scratch. And the thing with me, and one thing I've learned just with the way I learn things and how I stick to things, is that once I've learned it, that's it. I want to move on to something else. And for me, the problem with frameworks is that once I learn the framework to a certain point, I'm like, yep, I'm bored with it, move on to the next thing. And I can kind of see why the web industry is like that. You know, you first have React, you have jQuery, React, and now everything's moved over, from components to classes to server-side rendering. It's like there's always this iteration. And I think with me, it's like as soon as I learned the basics of Rails, it was like, yep, I'm done. Okay, yeah, I can figure it out. But then
what's your point on that one? Do you think that's partly why there's so much innovation in web development as well, because of that excitement of wanting to learn the next thing? I think there's lots of developers wanting to go, building projects in order to sort of learn the technology. And hey, we've got a new technology, right?
Would you call it innovation though?
I didn't. Well, yeah.
Well, the thing is though,
new versions of the same wheel. Yeah.
Well, when you think about it, websites are the same. They've been the same for like the last 20 years. And I think I brought this up in the last episode. It's just a bunch of objects and are displayed in a list form with a few forms, in a list format with a few forms. But the way we build them is just complex. So yeah, is it for innovation? I do think things are different. But for me personally, my first point was, I didn't want to just rebuild the same thing over and over again. Drupal allowed me to get to the business logic. Of course, I could say I still do a whole bunch of similar things in Drupal all the time, but that was my one.
Yeah, I've got some similar points coming up later, I believe.
Right. Well, let's jump to point 2 for you.
Interestingly, I covered a few of the points in the first one, and that's okay. They all blended in together.
Right. We'll jump up.
Actually, it does. This touches on your same thing, because here I'd been working, as I said, I'd been doing PHP and web development before, and it's the same point you said, but from a different angle of I had been rebuilding the same things over and over again. I was working for, before getting into Drupal, I was working for a company that built an online real estate listings management database. It was 8 years old at the time in 2011, right?
Oh.
So this is same thing, and didn't have a single index file and that sort of stuff. And we were using SVN, not Git, and weren't even using the SVN properly, right? The concept of a framework and a CMS was, at least in my mind at the time, a brand new concept I hadn't come across before. So I didn't even know at that stage that Drupal and things like that existed. I think I'd heard of them, but it's like, but I'm still busy building, and that wasn't existing. So we sort of, that real estate listings database, in hindsight, was a form of CMS. It was a real estate listings content management system, and had some. And I know at times when we actually built I'd built in an attempt to be able to whip up websites quickly for some real estate agents, built my own little small CMS, not knowing what it was. And funny learning Drupal, it does some of the things I was trying to build anyway. But one of the first things that got me about Drupal was that things like user management. You know, the amount of times I'd had to write user login sessions and stuff, and every single time, it's because it's so important from a security standpoint. You're never quite sure if you've done it correctly. You know, like there's not exact, and there may be nowadays, but at the time there's not like a checkbox, a list of do these things, and you're covered, and you know you're secure. But that's where Drupal brought that real big strong value of, hey, it's got user logins. I know they're implemented to a high degree of security.
Exactly.
I don't even need to worry about it.
Yes.
I just turn Drupal on, and then you can log in as a user. If there's a security hole, everyone's got it, and someone will patch it. Whereas when you build it yourself, you don't know it's there, and no one's going to patch it for you. So that leads to, that's pretty much a big reason why, and choosing Drupal is what landed in my plate, right? It wasn't like I did any research and looked at other CMSs. Drupal's what the opportunity was. I walked down that hole and went, wow, this is a much better, it came with its payoffs too. There's much bigger learning curves, and then sometimes it was harder to build things because you had to work around Drupal. Whereas before you could have just whipped it up, how's your father, and get it done. But whether that's, those advantages of, and straight away, like it's kind of, I think I said it last week, you turn Drupal on and you've got a website, right? Yeah. There is that, how long does it take to build a website? You go about an hour, right? But then there's a lot of customization that comes afterwards that can, but that's the thing about it, that's really true. And that's what's very exciting about Drupal, is you turn it on and there you've got a website.
Yes.
And now we can get on with building features and functions, and don't have to worry about manage. It talks to the database, and you've got a database abstraction layer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Built in. You don't need to choose one; it's chosen for you, and that sort of stuff. It's just this nice level of dictation of how to do things and having things done for you, and still enough excitement to be able to learn and add features and things. So
absolutely,
that pretty much covers that point, I believe.
Well, that goes perfectly into my second point, which is building a CMS is hard. I wanted to specialize, and I knew how much effort is required to build a basic CMS, because when I learned PHP, I think I got one of these Learn PHP and MySQL books, like these thick books. I bought it years ago at a Dimmicks on like George Street, back when it was an actual street, long time ago. And
it's the one downstairs in the basement.
Yes, that one. It shut down ages ago. But the one that you go downstairs, just close to Martin Place. Was it Martin Place? Yeah, it is. And I learned how to, and one of the things was creating a CMS. And I realized just how hard it is to create a CMS. So, and it's always one of these things, whenever you talk to, older developers that learned 10, 15 years ago, when they're
much older than us.
Yeah. Where you don't have these front-end frameworks, all of us built a CMS. All of us. At some point. Yeah. And so I learned it, and this goes to my third point as well. I already knew PHP. And so Drupal was PHP, which was great. And I also wanted to specialize, because then I started to realize, it's like, you know what? If I can actually specialize in a CMS, then I could get a job with it, and it can be my tool it could be part of my toolkit. And that's why, yeah, I chose Drupal. So what about you? Let's go to point. Well, you've gone through all of your points pretty much.
No, not all of them, but I've covered quite a few. Those blended, a lot of them blended in together.
Yes, yes. So maybe
plenty more to talk on.
Point 5.
I'm interested actually in your point, just then adding Drupal to your toolkit.
Yeah,
because my journey's been so much different, and I think that's where we deviate a little bit. In that, I'm a Drupal specialist, right? I worked for the same company for 10 years doing Drupal. We also did Moodle, right? The Moodle was a big part of our bread and butter, and a number of times they're like, "Do you want to try and put your hand up to do some Moodle stuff?" And I'd go, "Yeah," and then I'd work on Moodle for a bit, and then some Drupal work would come through, and they'd pull me back on the Drupal work, and it just never stopped. And getting involved in the community in the same thing, I became very much a Drupal centric. That's what I said. I'm a Drupal developer. So it's interesting that adding it to your Drupal became my toolkit in that sense. Like at the time, it was just a thread I pulled, and it became my entire. That's my definition of my career now. I'm a Drupal. I think I mentioned it. I'm a Drupal developer, not a web developer at this point, which is. Which is an interesting point to be quite blinkered in that sense. Where we're going down to point 8, did you say, or point 5?
Well, I was thinking point 5.
Doesn't. I kind of covered that a little bit because I mentioned that that how to create a module documentation. It was, and the same thing. Once I started pulling the thread of Drupal, it didn't stop. It was just, even once you got to the point where, as I say, I'm a Drupal developer. I can run Drupal courses. That's when I really improved my confidence, was when I volunteered to run a Drupal course and ran that course and went, "Oh, wow, I know what I'm talking about." Really boosted my confidence. And yet there's still so much I don't know. That well goes very deep. But the basics and the fundamentals, and it's the same across web development altogether. It goes back to your comments before. The basics and the fundamentals don't change. I've said that about PHP, right?
Yeah.
That people, you got to learn these new codes, learn this new coding language, learn these new technologies, learn these new things, and you go, and you got to keep up. And it's like, but the basics, and I do find some people kind of maybe don't get those basics at times either, but they don't change. Like coding's coding, control structures are control structures.
Exactly.
Right. So.
Yeah. And on that note, I've been on the lookout for some type of framework that you can use to develop basic SaaS applications. Now, with the JavaScript ecosystem, there's a ton of starter kits out there. But one thing I'm keen to find, and I have found a few, but I really haven't had the time to play with them, is there something that ships everything for you? So that is like similar to like a Ruby on Rails, but written in some type of JavaScript, just written in JavaScript. And there are a few of them out there, and I want to have a play with them, and I'm keen to kind of see how good they are, because I feel like everything just is going back full circle. Everything's going back to server-side rendering. Everything's rendered on the server. Everybody wants, content stored in a database or some Mongo. Mongo was popular, but now a lot of that Superbase and Firebase and all that type of stuff. Yeah. You just create your columns, and it's all just similar. The concept's the same.
Even things like so many REST APIs everywhere now, and you go, that's how HTTP was designed to be used in the first place.
Yes. Absolutely.
REST isn't this new idea, which it seems to be. People are, REST APIs. It's the buzzword now. But REST APIs are literally the HTTP spec, pretty much, as it was designed to be used.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how things do go full circle, and it's even, you see that through the industry all the time, where you go back and you look when we originally had these huge mainframes and these little terminals you used to connect to them. and then they got smaller and everybody got a powerful computer on their desk, right? And then the internet came about, right? And then you started even noticing that you start to see the same cycle happening in web browsers, right? So you had a web browser which just sucked down the HTML, and then you started writing and you had all this server stuff that would just display it. And then they came out with JavaScript, so you start shifting a lot of the workload into the browser again. And then phones came out, and you shifted it even further, so you had apps doing all this heavy lifting on your phone. And then the cloud came about. Now it's all shifting back to putting it all back, and now your device is becoming less powerful, especially with AI now, right?
Yeah.
Shifting all that work over onto and you see this perpetual cycle of shifting from one side to the other. And, be interesting to see if we go back to doing, and we kind of do, you even go because things like CMSs and Drupal comes about, and then you start building these websites in Drupal, it's great. And then somebody goes, but now Node's out, and everybody starts building all these new bespoke things in Node, right? Before they come up with, and then they build a CMS again or something like that. And you've got these other layers, but it's interesting. IT does that. Our industry cycles a lot, does this. I've noticed over the years, it just constantly
absolutely
makes those changes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let me jump on to my fourth, and probably I can chuck in the fifth point as well. And that is, one of the reasons why I chose Drupal to begin with was because I had a client. I was doing a bit of freelancing, back when people were like, "Oh, I need a website," and the main requirement for this client was that the site had to have clean URLs. This was when clean URLs was the thing that got you ranking in Google. And I went and searched for CMSs because I knew I didn't want to create my own CMS, and I just wanted to see what's available. And back then there was, I think Joomla just came out, or there was that fork between Mambo and Joomla, because I know that something happened with the Mambo CMS. I think it was called Mambo, and then Joomla came out.
Mambo. Yeah.
And Joomla actually charged for clean URLs, but Drupal didn't. So that was it. That was it works for Drupal. And this was the version 4 days. I don't remember which version of Drupal it was. It was 4 something. So the 4.5, 4.6, 4.7. But then I also discovered at the same time, the Drupal e-commerce module, which was the first e-commerce. I think it was actually developed by someone in Melbourne. And I remember that, and I was like, oh, this stuff's pretty cool. It means I can have a CMS and I can sell products with it.
Yeah. So that was before Shopify and Squarespace and such.
Before all of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my origin story of actually discovering Drupal, and also the fact that it was open source as well. That was a huge thing, because I did know about open source. I think I was actually running Ubuntu back then. Got sick of Windows before I came over to the dark side and jumped on a Mac.
Open source.
Yeah.
And it's interesting though that you mentioned clean URLs, because as I'm sitting here thinking about it and just having that comment about the technology cycling and repeating. Right? Before we had CMSs and all this fancy stuff, clean URLs were just what you had, right? Yeah. Because you make an index file, you make an index, which was the front page, you make another one called aboutus.html, right? Well, clean URLs, right? It's just been funny how, and then we move and make CMSs, and then we got to build a new technology to go back to clean URLs again, because they became important all of a sudden. It's funny how many things cycle like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of, I think that's what you were alluding to a bit. A lot of the technology we got now is big systems on top of, the original flat HTML files have been abstracted upon, and now they're getting abstracted again on top of, just to make them behave like flat HTML files used to.
Yeah, but then at the same time, you have a lot of frameworks out there that literally just generate static HTML, and because they've realized that's the fastest way of doing things.
Yeah, static HTML generators, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
It's an interesting question to what if we went back and started again, right? And go, okay, we've got flat HTML files. We've seen where it all gets to. What if we just wiped out all these technologies and just went, what if you build them from scratch without all these numerous layers and changes in tech? It'd be interesting to see what would you build. I think that's a good
there is value in these systems that we have, because you have to then build out all this scaffolding. And this is where I feel like sometimes you can spend a lot of time on just plumbing, on all the plumbing code, just to kind of bolt things together. And that's why there's a ton of like starter kits and all that for JavaScript or React based applications. There's a whole ton of them, because there's a lot of plumbing involved. It's like, I want to be able to use things straight away. And one thing to chuck on is that this year I'm trying to force myself to actually just build more things. Like just try building out something and post it online, see what happens. And I have often thought, it's like, okay, which platform do I want to use? And one side of me says, oh, no, try one of the latest, fun technologies, and so that you can learn it. But then at the same time, it's like, well, no, my skill set is Drupal. I know I can smash out this site and create a basic setup in a weekend, and then just get it out there and get feedback. It's like, well, why don't I just do that? But then at the same time, I'm thinking, well, if I tell people it's Drupal, they're gonna be like, oh, that's a bit old. I remember I went and did some small business course like in 2010, 2011. And I told somebody that I was a developer, and they go, oh, which language do you write in? And I said PHP, and they go, oh, what is that? A scripting language? And I was like, oh, I kind of felt offended, even though I don't feel offended, but I was like, oh, because they were a Java developer. It's like scripting language.
Scripting. What? I've never thought of it as scripting. It's interpreted. Well,
I don't know.
I don't know where it fits now. The line is blurred.
Well, this is probably a topic for a whole other episode. It's like, well, is PHP dead? It's like, it's been dead ever since I've used it. Seriously,
that speaks to getting into Drupal. Like, I was a PHP developer, and Drupal was PHP, so I moved into Drupal.
Yeah.
With everybody going, you got to learn a new language. PHP's going to be dead, and it just never has. It just, and Drupal's never gone anywhere either, right? Essentially, I'm one, sort of path of least resistance, but kind of following the money too. Like, I didn't. Drupal can be very lucrative. You get pretty good money being a Drupal dev, and that wasn't ever something I deliberately chose. I just learnt Drupal. Hey, I know Drupal. Hey, I got a job doing Drupal. Hey, the value for that skill's gone up. I got another job. I'm earning more. It wasn't a plan, but
yeah, because when I was playing around with all of these frameworks, you had Symfony, you had Rails, which was Ruby, you had Django, which was Python.
Yep.
They were all coming out. I think there were even a few. There were a few Java-based frameworks like Spring as well that I was trying to learn, because I was thinking, well, this is the next thing. This is what I need to learn. And now they're kind of gone. But even then, when I thought about PHP, I thought, PHP is dead. And, well, it hasn't. It's still around.
No, there's so many WordPress devs around, right?
Laravel, Symfony's even bigger now. You have the Laravel ecosystem. You have the Symfony ecosystem. You have WordPress.
Topic, the PHP itself, not just, it's poignant to Drupal because it's PHP. And, even now when you're putting React front ends on it, there's still Drupal at the back. There's still PHP there. There's lots of people building amazing React websites with PHP running it in the back end. Not in all cases, but in a lot of cases. We've had that with something we can talk about before. We've had that discussion where does Drupal fit in that ecosystem, and it fits very well.
Yeah, it does.
As a content management tool.
Okay. All right. So which point are we up to with yours? Because I kind of lost track.
That doesn't matter. Let's go. Because you mentioned the open source thing. That's one of the points on here.
Yes.
Which was big for me, to be honest. I'd had a dream for a long time to, maybe being very naive when I was younger, in the sense that I just had a passion for open source, in that it had always been easier, when I was younger, wanting to learn about networking and services. And it's like, kind of, you're in high school and your parents aren't loaded with money, and you're like, how do I set up a server? And it's like, we'll get hold of a copy of Windows Server. How much does that cost? Like $2,000. You're like, what? Like, that's just, how am I going to learn this if I kind of, right? And then Linux was around, so it's like, fine, I'll just use Linux. And that's, and that's the fun of learning, being able to learn so much, because there's all these enterprise grade tools you could play with in open source. And that really brought me around to, suddenly you're just going, why is everybody paying Bill Gates all this money, like, for what's freely available? It's like, to me, as in high school, it's like selling air. So I'd had quite a strong passion for open source in that sense, and wanted to work with open source. I just kind of gone, and I didn't enjoy Windows. I didn't enjoy the experience of using it, and I was getting locked into it. And, Linux was, I don't know, I had an affinity for it. And then, so it was surprising when because the company I'm working for sold themselves as an open source advocacy organization. There are even rules, it was open source all the way through. And then working there, everybody had Linux. The entire organization had Linux on their laptops. It was like 250 people there when I was working there.
Yeah.
I think there was one Windows machine in the entire organization, of an international organization, which, so that was a big part of Drupal too, because it was open source. And the same thing, there's that low barrier of entry to it being open source. Like, as a student, you want to go and learn, when you've got very limited funds and you want to learn a new tool. I mean, like, these days, I think from a marketing perspective, they got, Microsoft in particular got wind of that and went, okay, we're off a student pricing edition if you're a student. But I didn't go to uni. I was a self-taught person. I wasn't eligible, so it's like, oh, well, but then something like Drupal, it's just that sense of, I want to build this down, like also, it's another point. See, growing up on a farm, as I did, there was lots of bits and pieces. You wanted to build something, you went down the back, you got some wood, you got some wire, you got a few nails, you found the bits and pieces, you stuck it together. And then the open source world delivered that in IT too. I want to build something, you just go and find the bits and find the pieces that are freely available, and you stick them together. And that's what Drupal was, a big piece of website Lego, where you could just, I want to build something, and it generally had the bits. And even back in 2011, the catchphrase, there's a module for that, already existed. And now we're so far ahead of that, and there nearly always is. Even though it's an interesting thing that every site I've worked on, you build I'm going to swear, right? A stack of custom modules and custom code. But then you're always building in contrib modules. There's so much contrib, and it's just, I think Drupal's like Lego, right, in that sense.
Yes. The tricky part is figuring out which piece goes where, because yes, to answer the question of there's a module for that, yes, that's true, but those modules are more building blocks, and you need to understand fundamentally how those building blocks work.
And when they don't.
Exactly. I have often said this a lot, and I've probably said it many times, is that me personally, the best version of Drupal was Drupal 6, because it came with modules that offered some type of product out of the box. Whereas modules now are more libraries or toolkits to build on top of things. And so, yeah, you can build it, but sometimes other than web form, okay, web form is a module you install, you get form functionality, you get a form builder out of the box. It works. But coming back to the whole open source thing and Linux, I know that with me personally, I used to buy the Linux, I think it was Linux Australia magazines that came with the Red Hat CDs. And this was when I was in high school, so late 90s. And I remember installing Red Hat before, when it was still open source. on a Pentium 233, and I was able to play it. Oh no, I think I upgraded by then because I think I needed 64 meg of RAM to play Quake 3. I remember had to be that much, and so me personally, I do like the concept of open source, like especially with from a coding standpoint. But when it comes to operating systems and all that, I'm a bit laxed there because I think for me, it was when the reason why I chucked in the towel with Ubuntu, and I was using Ubuntu for about 2 years. I think I was like on 804 or something. So back in 2008. And it was when I wanted to connect a second monitor up, it was like, okay, I'll plug it in, not working. And I Googled it, of course. And it's like, oh, change your X11 conf, this and that. And I was like, you know, Windows 95, I could just plug in a monitor and it worked. And then I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to get I'm going to go get a MacBook. And then it was funny. I actually pulled out one of my older MacBook Pros just recently, and I spent a Friday night, because that's how I spend my Friday nights, installing Ubuntu on it. And again, it was one of these things on the old one. And it was like, okay, all right, I need to install drivers. Okay. I need to install Broadcom drivers for the Wi-Fi. Oh crap. I need to get on the internet. I've only got Wi-Fi. I don't have an Ethernet port. And no, my older laptop, I didn't have the dongle for the Ethernet. So I spent like an hour looking for it, found it, plugged it directly to the router to download the drivers to get Wi-Fi. And yeah, it was one of these things where it's like, you know what, I'm just going to stick to more Mac.
Similar, because we were touting last week the Slack channel, the Drupal's community in the Slack channel, and there was a conversation along these lines happening in there today, which was interesting.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah,
where it just asked what kind of laptop are you running. That ended up turning into a proprietary versus open source kind of conversation, which I might have started, to be honest, because I do that.
Yeah, I think
because I care. I kind of think it's things like right to repair and open source and stuff.
Oh, absolutely,
absolutely.
You know, and trust me, and I have thought about moving off Apple many times, but it's just, first of all, finding a good hardware. The thing that annoys me about Apple, here you go, another episode. The thing that annoys me about Apple is that with it was only their latest like M1, M2 laptops that they've finally gone a bit bigger again, and they've removed that crappy touch bar. But yeah, I wish they could. I wish you would just replace a few things. Like I actually threw out my 2008 MacBook, but I remember I could just clip out the battery and change it. I could unscrew the hard drive and RAM and all that type of stuff.
They're gonna get you.
Yeah,
they get their claws in and you're trapped in. That's one of the things I kind of, particularly Apple. It's like once you're in their ecosystem, you trapped there to a large extent.
Yes, absolutely.
That's interesting point.
Yes.
But open source was a big reason that I got into Drupal, and that's that same point. Like you can always, I kind of got trapped in Drupal in the end, in that sense, because that's where the work kept coming from. That's where it got so narrow.
Yeah.
Because it's my learning style. I learn what I need to know to solve the problem before me, and the problems before me were always Drupal problems.
Yeah.
And now you get that, what's that phrase about, when all you've got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Everything I do, you go, well, Drupal can solve. Drupal can do that. Drupal, now it's often not the right choice, but it's also, it'll do the job. That you build a real estate listings management database on it. If I want to build something that goes and, for example, analyzes real estate investments, you go, I can do that in Drupal. That's what it does. It's a data store.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not always the easiest thing to get to nuance stuff. See, this is where Drupal, I guess it's one of the challenges. Because there seems to be a little bit of, what do you call it? I guess a schizophrenic nature to Drupal, that on one hand, it's designed to be a clickety-clackety, no-code, build a website tool. Yet I've never seen a single Drupal website that ever did that. And almost to the point that, look, you don't need to be a developer. You can just go in there and install modules, configure it. And we got this concept of a site builder, but it's the same skill set. You're just doing it, like when you got in and you got to build views and configure blocks and find all those pieces and work out how to put them together and see that they don't work right and figure out how to configure it just the right way and how to pass the node ID into the view to get the list that you want. And then you go, you might as well be a dev, right? I've said that a lot about Drupal, and it's an interesting space. And that's one of the reasons I got into Drupal, was because it was supposed to make things easier, right? It's kind of, and it never eventuated. In that sense, it's also become like there's that idea. Drupal just, it's hard to explain, right? That there are some people that I've met people that call themselves site builders and they don't code, but it's still the same skill set to an extent. And I've never built a website where I didn't at least have to patch one of the contrib modules. Like every project I've worked on, you can really see it with Composer now. There's a big list of patches.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I commend people when I meet them and they run a Drupal site, but they don't code. I'm always like, I don't know how you do it, but they do it. And the thing is, though, it comes down to, you can get 80% to 90% of what you want. It's the last 10% that requires a lot of effort. And this is where time is spent with the client, because the client might ask for a feature, and this has happened to me countless times. And I would go to them and say, look, we can build this feature 90% of the way, but we just need to change this, this, and this, and we can do it in a day. Or if you really want a custom, it's going to take you 2 weeks. And this is where it's like a back and forth thing. Yeah. It's always that last little bit.
Just the promise of Drupal. I said to you the other week in a conversation, sort of new analogy I've got to explain it is Drupal's like a kit home. Right, you can get out Drupal and you can build a site, and it's a modular kit home. It's like you can move the kitchen from one side, you can put the kitchen on the other side.
Yeah.
As long as you're aware of how the plumbing mechanism in Drupal works, right? But then I found a lot of the time you're in projects with people, with software architects that aren't at all aware of what Drupal is or how it works. Right, so they've gone, we've hired you to use Drupal, we've decided to use Drupal, here, build this massive mansion with the kitchen in the basement and it hangs a foot off the ground, and we've got this tiny little nook and we've got flashing lights on the front door and there's a secret entrance in the back, right? And you're just like, trying to get Drupal to do that is a massive, you almost go, I'll rather not use Drupal. Right.
Yes.
Kind of, is Drupal the right tool for this job after all? Like, and we chose Drupal because remember the old rapid application development.
Yeah.
Yeah, buzzword, right? Which is where I think this came from. It was, but there's been that challenge, right? And that's another reason I got into, because it had so much promise to build things so quickly. And now we're in this world where you're absolutely right. You get 80% of the website done, and then the next 20% takes as long, if not longer, than the first 80%.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's part of the Drupaler experience, I think, and trying to manage the client expectations around that too. It's an interesting game we're in too, because I find pretty much every project I've been on, the client's very much dictating what technologies get done, when, how you integrate them. And I don't think of a lot of other jobs where the client's so heavily involved in the when you hire an architect to build a building, you're not going, no, I want the pipe to go up over the top of the bedroom and down into the basement and out the back, right? It's funny. It's an interesting.
Yeah. You don't have the client actually telling the engineer how to do engineering standards, and it's like, no, we don't do it. We don't do it this way. Yeah, I had a similar issue where on one of the projects before I moved out of Sydney. And in the interview, so this was just only a couple of years ago, and I have gotten pretty confident in interviews because I've been contracting. You go to a few interviews, and one question I always ask them, because you know how they're always like, oh, do you have any questions for us? And I've got a standard set of questions that I ask just to show that, I'm
You said a standard set. I thought you said a stack of questions.
A stack of questions. No, a standard set. Well, a stack of questions as well. But one of the things that I always ask is, why Drupal? Like,
Yeah,
why?
good question.
And this project that we were on, the CTO, I think you would call them. They were like, oh, we want to build a modular system, and Drupal has modules. And I'm like, that's not how it kind of works, but I kind of see how you think of it. But their concept was, oh, because Drupal's has modules, we want to build a modular system. And I straight away, within the first day, I was telling the other devs, this shouldn't be Drupal. Build it in something else. Like, it doesn't have to be Drupal. I don't know why we're building it in Drupal.
Yeah.
But hey, I got a contract out of it. So, but I'll be the first person to tell you not to use Drupal. I do not promote it. Like, I get a lot of people who come to me and say, oh, I want to build an e-commerce site. If you want to build an e-commerce site, go to Shopify. Done. End of discussion.
100%. Been saying that for a long time. I used to tell people to get a Facebook page, right, way back in the day.
Or even that, like, there's so many ways of selling stuff online. I would even say, don't even go, depending on what type of product you're selling, go on a platform that has eyeballs, validate your idea. I remember I helped set up a BigCommerce, I think it was BigCommerce site years ago, like about 10 years ago. This was when BigCommerce was still targeting the Shopify, because I feel like BigCommerce now is more enterprisey. And so, yeah, just use BigCommerce for that. If you want a blogging platform, there's a whole ton of them out there.
Yeah.
There's WordPress. Only use Drupal if you have the experience, if you want to learn it, or if you have the budget.
Yeah.
Big important thing. Same thing as like with headless. Only go headless if you have a front-end team or somebody that's in charge of front-end.
So you were on that point of why Drupal, I guess, but we're talking about why use Drupal on a project. We've shifted a little bit, but that's the last project I worked on. They wanted to build a website that was essentially a custom front end to another service off in the back end somewhere. And there was an existing module for integrating that, so it could actually sync Drupal's content types, the content types of the back end systems and things like that. So they chose Drupal, but then by the time I got brought onto the project, they'd already sort of decided, they designed a new theming front end, and someone had already come through and laid a foundation to do a bootstrap theme, etc. in there. And it was a bit of, as I started doing the theming, I'm like, this needed to be thought through better, because we should have gone headless, because now we're using Drupal to do all these. It's great on the admin side, being able to track the reports and stuff of things that were coming in and clean up syncing, and the interface that came with that integration was fantastic. But when it came to presenting that data on the front, we had to do so much theming, and it's just like, I go, if we'd had a couple of React devs on the team, would have been great. Hand it over. And it got me very interested in React at that point, because I was just sitting there going, not having worked on a headless, I really started to realize, okay, that's where headless plays. That's where Drupal fits in that headless space, is because it's got that ability, those modules and things to be able to integrate with other systems and pull that data and become a data integration hub. And then you can put whatever front end you want on it. I think, I'm kind of feeling like, really, it should be that Drupal's theming engine should have had its day by now. I think that's, I think it's almost always a mistake to try and build, because like, as we were just talking to, and I'm sort of thinking off the cuff a bit at the moment, but pretty much anything you'd want to build a Drupal front end on, there's existing tools for that. You want to do a blog, there's blogging engines. You want to do a video delivery system, they exist. You go, like that's, you want a newsletter, they, and if you are going to use it for that, in a sense, it's like more like Drupal's the tool that you build something like Squarespace out of. It's something you build Shopify out of. It's like, kind of, if you want to build an online shop, don't use Drupal to build an online shop. Use Drupal to build the platform that supplies online shops. Yeah, I think that's kind of where its space is a bit. But Drupal's
that is
in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've had this conversation with other people about the fact that moving Drupal over to Twig was, I don't want to say it's a waste of time, but it was, the effort wasn't really worth it, because the front end has moved forward. And I do believe that there has been discussions about picking some type of framework, but I don't think anything eventuated from that. But surprisingly, in my work that I do now, I do spend a fair bit of time in the front end, and I do miss the simpler days of not fighting against Twig. Twig is okay if you know it and you understand it.
Bit of a promotion for you while we're here, though, because that's when you're talking about the front end. Your video about Radix, I think I followed that once, and I just found that system for building it was kind of, when integrating Radix with paragraphs and layout builder and things like that works really well. But at this point, I'm still going, how often, how big a space is that it fills as a gap in the market? Right?
Well, that is an interesting question, because Radix 6 now. Annoyingly, I did a recent video on Radix 5, and then 2 months later, Radix 6 comes out with support for, single components?
Yeah.
What is it? Single components? I forgot what it's some single web components or something, which is an experimental module in Drupal. And already people in the video have asked me, oh, when are you going to do a new version of this video? Single component directory. That's it. So that is an interesting space. And another thing which I've actually been playing, because I want to do a live stream on, is Tailwind and Drupal, and just see how difficult that is to set up. I did spend a night or two setting it up. And when I say set it up, I mean, I started with a fresh theme where you set the base theme to false, so nothing's coming through, absolutely bare bones markup. And
and build your own theme from scratch.
Building it from
nothing. Right?
Yeah, building it from scratch. Now setting up Tailwind is relatively simple. Like, it's a few commands and you're done. And you just adjust the few JSON files and you're done. Of course, configuring it and getting it integrated into Drupal is a bit of a challenge. It's not hard. I just need to spend the time to do it. But that's one thing I want to do and have a play with it, because I do think, the front end's going to be interesting, because I feel like things have shifted more towards like HTMX, where we're still writing HTML, and this is important. And this is where, if the JavaScript world moves away from these, virtual DOM and everything in like a, JSX or TSX file.
So I've got a very interesting question around HTMX on that one Monday.
Well, okay. If things move around, everyone's going to just come back to HTML, because the HTML spec needs to upgrade. But I do believe that with a good mixture of Alpine.js and HTMX, you can have a pretty decent front end without going headless at all. And that's one thing. Again, I just don't have the time to
you code up on GitHub. I want to have I've got something now. Do I have time? Nah. I want to have a sticky beak. Because it's another thing that like I've alluded to that a few times in this conversation, having, why did I start in Drupal? Because it was the path of least resistance. But then I've been stuck in Drupal, and that's every technology outside of Drupal I've learned through Drupal, right? When Node came along and he started using Grunt and task runners to build your themes and stuff, I didn't build the theme. I'd come onto a project and they're there, and I'm learning them from already pre-configured and already set up. Going, here, run these commands, and you're like, I don't know what this is. And then how do I integrate it with Drupal? Somebody knew how it works and integrated it with Drupal, but I don't. I've learned it from, and even things like Bootstrap. You're kind of learning Drupal Bootstrap and Bootstrap both at the same time, and it's such a difficult learning curve, because you never quite learn Bootstrap, right? Because you've got a problem to solve, you need to get it done, you've got deadlines to hit. So you're really coming from, how do I do Bootstrap in Drupal's theming layer? Because there's always some extraction layer, like someone's already configured it, right, and set up their variable overrides, and you're kind of learning it through this, and then Drupal's concepts, like, which I can't even think of right now, but there's a Drupal layer over the top of it, and Drupal Bootstrap, even though it literally sits on top of Bootstrap, Drupal Bootstrap is a different thing than Bootstrap is. And I've built heaps of sites with Bootstrap and could probably tell you a lot about Boot, but I've never built a Bootstrap without Drupal.
Yes.
You know, it's like an interesting, you know, and that's an interesting thing that Drupal does to me, at least. So that's what I said. I got trapped in Drupal in that sense. Like every problem I've ever had was a Drupal problem. So
that's it. But coming back to the whole thing about the abstraction layer, that's one thing I learned early on, that I wanted that layer removed. When I was learning Ruby on Rails, I felt that it was kind of holding me down. So Rails and even I think Symfony, well, back in the day, they used to be out, you know, you could do all this Ajaxy stuff through the framework, and Drupal has Ajax commands, but it does it in its own weird way where sometimes it's like, just show me how to do it properly. Let me just do it myself. Yeah. And that's why I think the back end you leave as Drupal. The front end, I want to have my own type of stack. Okay, that can be either headless or it can be which I'm trying to play around with, which is a combination of Tailwind, Alpine.js, and HTMX, because
Drupal just exposes all the data as an API.
Exactly, and that's it. Because have you played around with attachments like behaviors and things like that? Like Drupal, again, it's a abstraction layer. Now I understand it, yes.
Once you understand it,
you understand it, but coming back to your whole thing about with deadlines and you only learn enough, that's how I feel like my last 20 years has been, where I've just learned enough to kind of get it over the line, but I haven't really learned it deeply other than Drupal. And that's the same thing about Docker. It's the same thing about all these like server-side stuff, which you need to know. But even though
you become a jack of all trades, master of none very quickly.
Yeah. And I think nowadays it's even, I think now with like AI and things like that, maybe we're going back to more of being a generalist.
I mean, I want to ask our audience, who are these guys that aren't in that boat? Who are these people that, you know, because like you meet people and they just know Docker in and out, and you go, oh, I guess they're DevOps people.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Like that's and it's interesting as a developer, you kind of find there's always crossover. Like a DevOps needs to know a certain level of coding, and they do. But as particularly, I think as a Drupal developer, you need to be a DevOps person. You need to be a front end person. You need to be a back end person.
Yes.
Right? Yes. You need to know it all.
Yes.
Full stack developer, by necessity. Like kind of, and that's another question. What's it? No such thing as a full stack developer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the wide world of Drupal and where is it going? Where's it fit? Because there's all these new front ends, which I'd love to know those technologies, or have an opportunity to learn them. Right? That's, you know, it's you do
Absolutely.
you learn. That's exactly my experience too. Always just learning just enough.
Yes. All right. Well, let me jump on to my points, because I think we've pretty much gone through all of your points, but I've got a few things. Yeah, I've got a few other things. Coming back to the reason, why we became Drupal developers. Well, one thing for me was just going to the meetups early on really exposed me to people in the industry, people looking for Drupal developers. And that's where I met a lot of people, and I've ended up working with many of them. So I could say that just going to meetups has helped from a career standpoint hugely. Going to meetups, going to Drupal South and things like that, and Drupal conferences has helped a lot. So I've got that down as a point.
Interesting. So it's a great way to learn, because it gets you into that's a good point. I think if anybody's wanting to learn web development, hey, there's a good reason to get into Drupal, because you suddenly get this access to mentoring for free, ad hoc. And there's if you want to go and maintain a module, you can get access to or contribute to core. You can actually pick yourself up an actual mentor. But I've totally that's because trying to learn it all by yourself, you don't know what you don't know. And when you've got access to people I find that Slack resource immensely amazing when you can go in. Of course, you don't know what you don't know, and you can ask questions, and you just get thrown. I had no idea that's an option.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially when they're face to face, you and I having conversations. I mean, both of us. I think I've learned a lot from you tonight. Different perspective, different experiences.
Yes.
I've been aware of HTMX, but talking to you about it, I learn it a bit more. It becomes real, right?
Yeah.
It's not just I saw a YouTube video on a guy doing HTMX. What's HTMX? To have a conversation with somebody I know talking about it. Go, hey, there's this real thing.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Well, today I asked the question in the Drupal Slack, and I learned about a new module. So, which actually helped out. Mind you, I had to install the alpha, the module, and patch it to get it working with the way I want it to work. Just the Drupal way of doing things. Yeah. But this module I never knew about it. And so it's like, that's a good way of just asking a question.
Oh, that was your cloning layout builder question.
Yes. Yeah. Cloning layout builder configuration. And then, it was recommended to use a module called Field UI. Would never have thought of looking Field UI. Now, Field UI tools or something. Now, I Googled layout builder clone, and I found a cloner module for that because, the usability of a module starts with the name. But then somebody recommended to use, this Field UI tools, add this patch, tested it all out. And it works. Like based off my basic testing on a sandbox site, it works. And that was very helpful, and I didn't know about it.
Example of why you need access to the community, because I've had that same thing before. People go, "Why don't you just read the manual, or why don't you just Google it?" And you go, "One, I didn't know it existed, so what manual was I going to read, right? And I don't know what it's called." And then that's an example. I do something. Your examples. That's a great example of you Google clone layout builder module. And you find all it, and someone goes, "No, you've got to use the Field UI tools." Why would you search for Field UI tools? You need to know to know.
But it is a good module, that Field UI, if you need to manage your fields. Yes, but layout builder, exactly. I just didn't put two and two together. It's like, is it going to be used for layout builder?
If you know, you know. And if you don't,
exactly. That's why you need to know to use Rabbit Hole to lock down your entity URLs. Yes.
Yeah.
Great name. Terrible name, great module, but it's one of these things that, again, I don't know where I heard it. I heard this, back in Drupal 5 days. It's like usability of a module starts with the name, and that is so true.
I've never heard that before, but I agree with it.
I learned that a long time ago. So that's what I've always thought about, because people search for modules. And that's why I started WebWash to begin with, because there were so many modules out there, and that people just need to understand, you can do this, you can do that. Especially, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
So bottom line, why'd we get into Drupal? Because Drupal was there.
Pretty much. I think, I can wrap up my journey, my whole origin story till now.
Yeah.
And the reason is that, well, when I started Drupal, I had a lot more time. Okay. But Drupal excited me enough and kept me interested just enough that I kept learning new things about it. Whereas, as I said earlier on, as soon as I've learned something, like something basic, I'm done with it. It's like, all right, I know how to do it. And this is one thing I've actually noticed, that with my brain, the way my brain works, like if I have a bug, say on a website, it will just, gnaw in my head. It's like, I need to get it fixed. And I can be up till like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. If I try and stay up writing tutorials, I'll be asleep, typing. I just can't. But
I can get fixated on bugs.
Yeah.
Bevan, just leave it. Yeah. But.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that when I learn these type of frameworks and things like that, I might learn something in React and I'll be like, I need to figure out how to pass a state, do this one particular thing. As soon as I've done that, it's like, okay, I'm done with it. I'm bored now. Next. Okay, I've done it. And then, but with Drupal, it was enough that I could switch between things. And that's one thing I've also noticed is that when it comes to projects, I cannot work on a project, one single thing for more than, say, a week or two. And the type of work that I've always done with Drupal is that everything's nicely compartmentalized, and it gives my brain enough variety to work on this ticket. You're playing with this part. Then, you spend a day or 2 or 3, you work on the next ticket, and you work on this part. But the differences between the tickets is enough that it feels like something new.
Yeah.
In a way. It's hard to explain. And I feel like Drupal, being a Drupal dev, has just given me that enough, just enough like difference between it, the novelty between the tasks. If I had to write React code every single day and I was just writing components and all that, I couldn't do it. Yeah. But the process, the actual work of a Drupal dev, there's a lot of actual non-Drupal work involved. I don't know about you. Yeah. I don't know about you, but me being a developer, I've realized 80% is actually learning to communicate and figuring out what problem you are trying to solve. Because so many times I've been in meetings where meetings are just wasted. And once you understand what problem you're solving, once you know how to architect it, it doesn't matter what tool you're using. As long as you understand it in your head, or you are trying to understand it from the BA that's trying to explain it to you, because the business analyst doesn't know how to write tickets and things like that, and I end up going in there and updating the tickets myself.
Yeah,
you
spend. They're not a Drupaler. No slide on some of these BAs out there.
But yeah.
I alluded to it so much earlier. Like, if you don't know how Drupal works, then you don't, like, sometimes the solutions you get given, you're just like, but that's not how, Yeah. It's hard to come up with a clear-cut example, but sometimes it's, I'm sure you've been across these situations.
Oh, yeah, I've been, yeah.
Just put this thing here, and you go, yeah, but in Drupal, that's like rewriting the whole subsystem.
Exactly. And that's why when I've worked with good project managers that understood Drupal, that helped a lot, because they can then field and shield you from client requests coming in, just like basic things. Because one thing I get a lot, even at my current work, is they would ask for a feature and they would ask, is it possible? And my first response to everything is like, of course it's possible. Anything's possible. What type of question is that? But do you have the budget for it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Exactly. It's like, do you have the budget for it? And is it actually worth the effort of putting it in? And so yes, everything is possible.
I learned the trick of putting options down there. Option 1, we can turn it on and it'll give you this, but you won't get this and this and this.
Yes.
Option 2, we can turn it on, we can do a bit of customization, you get most of it. And first one's like, $100. Option 2's, $500. And then option 3 is like $10,000, right? Which is, and often you're finally off, like you're not selling it in money. You're kind of going with so many hours and how levels of difficulty, and you never know what the client's going to pick. Usually number 3, I try and really unsell it, right? It's like try and make it just seem as hard. Of course, it's probably harder than I think it is. But I've had clients that go, no, we want number 3. And all right then.
Oh yeah. I'm the same as well.
Understand what and I find that a good approach for communicating those levels sometimes. But that's if sometimes you don't even. Sometimes it's just it's hard to even get an image. You kind of got that instinct from being around a long time. You go, this smells difficult. Why is it hard? I just think it is. Which is good to have other Drupalers on your team sometimes, because they'll pull you up and go, you can just do this. No. Didn't know I could just do that.
Well, sometimes I know that this has happened to me a lot, where I'm just in too deep into a problem that I can't see a basic solution, and it's not until somebody just says, "Oh, why don't you do it this way?" And then it's like, oh yeah, it's like, why don't we do it that way? And
Yeah.
sometimes, and in the past, I would often be like, oh, Ivan, you're an idiot. Why didn't you think of that yourself? And I'd be like really harsh on myself because I'm thinking that's such a rookie mistake. I should have thought about it. And sometimes I kind of feel embarrassed that, oh, I should have said. It's like such a simple thing. But I feel like you don't see it because you're so far in the feature that it's not until somebody comes out, just sees it from the top, and they're like, well, why don't you do that?
Yeah. And that's the exact opposite can be very true as well, though. When a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons why I like planning poker and Scrum and stuff, though, because it pulls up. Some people just go, it's a 1, and I'm like, it's a 12.
Yeah.
And then you get to have the conversation. Why do you think it's a 12? Of course, this, and it's hard when you're the only one that can see the problem, but you can't quite articulate it very well. And the communication skills take a bit, but it's kind of, can you just trust my 12 years of Drupal experience and you guys don't have that, like that? That's going to be hard. But then Scrum allows for that too, because you get halfway through the thing and you're like, halfway through your sprint and you're like, but then I find it hard though. Being a Drupal expert, it's often hard to communicate to non-Drupalers what the challenges are. Of course,
yes,
there's so much domain-specific language in that sense, and it's like I don't have time to sit here and teach you Drupal in order for you to understand what I'm trying to explain. Right? I've been up against that before. With can you please just take my word for it that this is harder than you think it is?
Yeah, absolutely.
But a bit off topic from why did we, because we're wrapping up. But that's that journey of at least why did we start Drupal leads into why are we still there. Because even having said all that, Drupal just keeps coming along with, and it's exciting. It does have that excitement, and it can solve so many problems, and there is always work for it, and it does have its place. So, there's a reason why the government's using it everywhere. Because it's stable, especially now. And, Drupal 8 was a big boon. Like I couldn't wait for that to come out. And that was very exciting. Like remember they used to do that graph when Drupal 8 came out, like the learning curve, the frustration. That was kind of like very exciting.
Yes.
Really hate it. And then you go, oh, I love it. Right. It's, and I think there's a lot of things in Drupal that follow that process, to be honest. It's a lot of, but yeah, when Drupal came out with the services and things, and I have no idea how to relate to somebody learning Drupal from scratch now, because that was a huge learning curve, and and it was basically learning Symfony, but it's also learning Drupal Symfony. I sat down and tried to do some Symfony products, and it was like 70% familiar.
Yeah.
I kind of and sort of started to realize what Drupal actually brought with it, because you can't just go into Symfony and go, right, I've got users and I've got, it's you suddenly get it, and it's like interesting. You sit down and go, okay, I'm going to build a website in Symfony. I didn't know where to start. It's like, hang on, I don't know what, in that sense, because Drupal just brings so much out of the box. And I think a lot of the time you should just, maybe you should just be using Drupal instead. It does all the same things. Is there anything Symfony does that Drupal doesn't?
Well, yeah, that comes down to the question of framework and product.
Yeah.
So Drupal comes with, it depends. Sometimes I feel like Symfony would be faster from like a performance standpoint, purely because there's just not that much, there's just less code. And well, there's a market for Symfony. It's still going strong. Yeah. Like I would say it's going very well. And that's the same with like Laravel as well, where Laravel uses Symfony components. So Laravel is built on top of Symfony.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. See, yeah. Drupal.
Same as yeah, but I mean, when you say like these components, these are like library level components, like the HTTP, like the request, like what is it, the HTTP requests and things like that.
Yeah.
Guzzle, that you can essentially use on any PHP composer-based product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like. Yeah, I always like. That's where we discussed it before. Drupal being a framework and a CMS at the same time. And then now, especially since we went to Drupal 8 and we've got off the island, it's got Guzzle, right? And it's just there. You don't need to make a decision. It's just there. You don't. You know, and I think it solves a lot of, what we're talking to, it solves a lot of those architectural questions. You install Drupal and a good chunk of your architectural questions are already solved, which comes back to the same point before about when you've got a business analyst who doesn't understand Drupal, who then goes and reinvents all those already solved problems in ways that aren't compatible with the solution that Drupal's done. You know, it's like, so anyway, I think...
I think we are done. I've got the only last point I've got is I just chucked in here Google Maps. Now I'll just quickly rant that one of my first presentations at the Sydney meetup was building out embedded Google Maps when all this like mapping stuff was like popular, using views and location module. And for me, that blew my mind, and that blew everyone's mind of what you could do without writing any custom code. And you could even adjust the bubble that when you press on the location, you can see
without code.
Title. Without code. No code. Yeah, see, Drupal should have pushed itself as a no-code platform or low-code platform. I think I've seen a few people push Drupal, like trying to market it that way, because it is kind of a low code.
Yeah, you know, I don't believe in no code. I hear that.
Yeah, no code.
I don't believe you.
Yeah, that's
even Zapier, and then Zapier is the same thing. You can do it with Zapier. You don't need to be a developer. You can just build it in Zapier, and you go and use Zapier, and you go, this is the same skill set. Just
but it's easy to understand the concept of triggers and actions and things like that if you don't have to write code.
Yeah. But then you often got to write code in the back end and make up for the things it doesn't do anyway.
Well, that's why you have ChatGPT now. You just ask ChatGPT. Yes. Anyway.
Oh. Take our jobs. Take our jobs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. Fantastic. I guess for the viewers, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. Tell us why you became a Drupal developer, or perhaps why not never want to become a Drupal developer. I don't know. It's all good for engagement. Chucking in those comments, and
if you agree with us or disagree with us. If anything you said was controversial, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway. That is it from me. Bevan, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm done.
That's it. You're done.
Great chat.
Cool. All right, great chat. Well, then we'll see you all in the next episode. See you later.
See ya.